Hi everyone, my name is Daniel Starkey. I'm the head of business development at bloqit. bloqit is a provider of out-of-home solutions specifically around lockers, so locker hardware, locker software, and the deployment and maintenance services. We are based out of Portugal as a company. I myself am based in Germany. Those of you with a keen ear might notice I don't have a German accent. That's because I'm British. Those of you that know British very well, I'm British, okay? It's really great to be here to talk about a topic which I think is really changing the way that we're shopping and how businesses are delivering. So out-of-home delivery. It's not a new topic. It's a topic that has been covered by various contributors over the past day and a half. And despite some rather large out-of-home networks with the likes of DPD, I think earlier on GeoPost DPD, I think even with you.
Yeah, 132,000.
132,000 points, which is impressive. And I know that DHL in Germany, where I live, they've 15,000. They have 10,000 parcel shops. They have 15,000 lockers. They're planning to grow that to another 30,000. So wow. There's a lot of things happening. However, we're still in a very early adoption phase, or at least it's my view, we're still in a very early adoption phase of out-of-home. Over the last 10 or so years since I've been involved in and around the parcels industry, the demands on parcel carriers have changed dramatically. So we've seen the rise of things like next day, or even in some cases same day delivery. And we've seen an increase in parcel volumes beyond anything anybody could have ever dreamt of. And all of this has meant that the industry is constantly evolving, or it's having to constantly evolve. And if we add a little bit of fuel to that fire, we have consumers whose expectations are consistently growing and growing. And I think yesterday it was talked about Gen Z, and they want everything and they want it right now. And all of this is creating some challenge for this traditional and predominantly used two-door home delivery. And with these challenges come opportunities. And so as the pressure on this traditional home and two-door delivery mounts, it's clear that we need a new approach. And I'm convinced that out-of-home is that new approach. For today's session, what I'd like to do is take a look at what the data is telling us in terms of the current challenge, or the scale of the challenge that we are seeing in the last mile delivery space. I want to take a look at who are the drivers of change. So who are the people that are really investing their dollars, their euros, their pounds in helping drive adoption of more out of home. And I'll take a little look at the opportunity open to retailers, to carriers, for pushing and moving to a much more even split of delivery from between out of home and two-door as well. I'm sure there's a lot of retailers in this room, and you'll know a hell of a lot more about retail than I do. As a retailer to succeed and continue to exist, you rely upon attracting, maintaining, keeping customers, having repeat business. And one of the ways in which you guys are doing this is really understanding who your customers are, understanding what their preferences are, what they like, what they don't like, and ensuring that your products and your services and your offering is as seamless and easy and integrated as possible. One of those metrics is delivery method. And I'm sure everybody in this room will have been doing their homework, and they will have looked at all the studies, like this DHL delivery and returns report from last year. The new one came out this year, and I'll talk about that. It came out yesterday, and I'll talk about that in a second. But if you are going by what do my customers prefer and what do they want, you are going to say, well, my customers want two-door delivery, so I'm going to offer them that. And you can see that we ordered this by percentage of preference for home delivery. And you can see that there is a fairly unanimous preference for two-door delivery. The report that came out yesterday, and the organisers didn't let me change my slides, it actually shows that there has been, over the last 12 months, there's been a slight increase in adoption of out-of-home. So we've seen around about a 5% movement. So we're going in the right direction. I guess I'm just asking, is it enough? And so while we're talking about offering the customers what they're looking for, I want to provide over the next 15-20 minutes or so an alternate view, or at least challenge that idea or that concept that actually perhaps for delivery methods there are benefits associated to trying to drive behavior away from two-door and onto more out of home. So this sounds rather extreme, but this is exactly what the data is telling us. And the data is telling us that there is a whole host of challenges associated to relying predominantly or solely on two-door delivery. I'm sure a lot of these would be of knowledge to you. Some things are easier to know. They affect you yourself. I mean, I myself, when I look at increasing fuel costs, and I was driving here from where I live in Germany, the 3 hours over, and I had to stop for petrol, and I had to fill up for €1.75, I think it was, a litre of diesel in my car. This is something that the carriers are experiencing on a daily basis. The volatility in the cost base. There are labour shortages, labour costs are increasing, there is increasing competition, we have failed first deliveries at the door, which is causing more and more problems in itself. If I take a look at some of the data and we see the 11-year period between 2013 and last year, we've seen an over 500% increase in parcel volumes moving around the world. This is putting an incredible strain on those networks that we have in place and working. And this is goes back to the piece that I said at the beginning about constant evolution. The carriers that are responsible for moving these boxes from A to B, or probably more accurately B to C, they are constantly having to invest and increase and improve their infrastructure in order to be able to handle this increase in parcels. And actually, if we look ahead on the right-hand side of this diagram, we can see that the projections are saying this is going to continue to happen. Statista says for 2 years. We have other statistics that are talking about exactly the same thing. Everybody is saying e-commerce is rising, it's becoming more popular, people are buying more online, and this is going to be starting to cause a problem for those networks of delivering parcels. If we change gears slightly and we move on to some of the labour challenges that we are seeing pretty much unanimously across the board. We have here a picture, my AI generated picture of a friendly PostNL delivery person. If we imagine this scenario 20 years ago, our delivery men and women who were braving the elements every day were doing their rounds on foot, perhaps with a bicycle, with a satchel full of letters. Every single delivery was a successful first time delivery. All dropped off into the letterbox, happy days. Fast forward to modern day, I should have inverted the colour and black and white, but anyway, fast forward to present day, and this job is a much different job. Those routes are now with large vans, they're carrying hundreds of parcels. There is no longer 100% first time delivery success rate. This is much more reduced. They're carrying a lot more devices, they're having to conduct a hell of a lot more transactions at the door. There is a lot more pressure. Sometimes we hear of figures of 150 drops per day. This is extremely inefficient. And if we now look to what some of the reports are telling us, is that perhaps this is one of the symptoms or one of the reasons for this. S&X said at the end of 2024, there were 11,000 delivery driver vacancies in the UK alone. So these people, so your shop could be as fantastic as anything. It could be working really well. You've got upward trending figures, more and more people buying. If in the end your carriers don't have enough people to deliver those parcels, your customers are going to be upset. They are going to leave your store, they're going to blame you, and you're going to see those numbers reduce. And if we expand that out into a Europe-wide, the IRU at the end of last year, the same period, saw 500,000 vacancies across Europe, which is not just delivery drivers, but it's also HGV, which is also a very important part of the chain. Exasperating all of this as well is increasing cost base. So you're hearing and we're seeing that a lot of the carriers, the national postal operators, they are having to strike deals with their workers unions to increase benefits, increase pay, and over the make long-term guarantees for continual increases in packages to ensure that they are maintaining people in those jobs and that they are attracting more people to come and do those jobs. And so we're seeing a bit of a kind of a competition here. We're seeing increasing volumes, which are projected to continue to increase. But then we're also seeing shortages of labour to do the last mile delivery into the doors. And we're also seeing increasing costs in order to be able to do that. And so if we add all of those things together, the cost of delivery is only going to go one way. The cost of delivery has to only go upwards if we continue relying predominantly on home delivery. And so then the question is it really the time now? Is now the time to embrace the future? And certainly from my perspective and what we see from the data, and we kind of see the picture that it's painting, it seems a bit of a pretty bleak future if we are not acting now to try and improve that situation and balance out that mix between home delivery and to-door. So going into much more PUDO, allowing 24/7 availability, and moving into an infrastructure which is much more scalable, we're moving away from one which we're seeing right now is actually unable to scale to the levels that we are projecting into the future. The next question would then be, okay, so if we agree we are going to act now, who's responsible for acting now? Should it be the carriers? Should it be regulators who are mandating a certain amount of out of home? Should it be the retailers? Should it be driven by the consumers? Are the consumers the ones that we should be listening to? And then using them to guide some of our decisions. And I think my view, and what I'd like to say here and impress upon everybody, is that I believe it is a joint effort from everybody in the industry. We should all be listening and understanding to the data and see the challenges that are coming up ahead, and we should all be moving to try and push more out of home into the future. I conducted a little bit of very quick internet research for this presentation to try and see, okay, so who are those drivers of change now? Who's really taken on the challenge? Who's really said, okay, I'm gonna change the narrative. I'm gonna push out of home as a strategic part of my business. And it's very easy to very quickly find what I've called here a flurry of carrier activity, even over the past 6 months. A lot of these images are predominantly lockers, but lockers, PUDO, anything out of home, we are seeing carriers investing significant sums of money in building their networks. We heard from DPD earlier. We've heard from various other carriers as well. We know everybody at the moment, or a lot of carriers at the moment, are looking for ways to diversify their delivery into more out of home. Some of them dipping their toe, so in smaller numbers, and others really ramping up in creating a much larger network. There's a lot of activity right now in the UK, where you're from. Very exciting space. If I do the same research on the retailer side, I'm not going to point fingers, but if I do the same research on the retailer side, who from the retailers are really driving change? I had to work a lot harder to come up with real examples of how retailers are really helping, pushing, incentivizing moves into out of home. We see things like one-off lockers, like Decathlon has a very nice click and collect, but these things aren't helping anything in terms of scale. MediaMarkt in Germany recently, they have struck a partnership with GLS and DPD, who also struck a partnership. everybody striking partnerships together to host Pudo packet shops, parcel shops in every single one of their markets. This, in my view, is fantastic, and this is the kind of thing moving forwards we really need to see more of. The unicorn out of all of these, from my perspective, is the Vinted example. I'm sure you guys know much more about Vinted than I do. So Vinted is a marketplace, very young organization, or was a marketplace. And through a vision and investment into infrastructure, they have turned their business from just a marketplace into what you would consider to be a logistics powerhouse. And I have to say right now, powered by Bloqit. Anyway, and actually in Q1 this year, IFM ranked Vinted Go as the #1 clothing retailer by volume sold in France, which is an amazing achievement from an e-commerce marketplace. Online, they don't have anything. They don't have any inventory of their own. It is people exchanging goods, and they have become the #1 clothing retailer in France. So how should we be rethinking delivery? Is Vinted the only way to go? Should it only be really just the carriers? And I think in order to be able to understand or create or come up with an answer to this, we need to understand the total addressable market. If I look at Europe, and we are at Deliver Europe, if I look at Europe, there are a lot of potential users. We have very high parcel volumes, and as we explored earlier, the parcel volumes are predicted to continue on an upward trending path. We have what sounds like a very large amount of Pudo locations and even APMs. But we're still, as we explored earlier, very much in the early stages, and there is pockets of areas where you have more than others. Poland is probably what you might consider from an out-of-home perspective, the example.
Can I just jump in here?
Yeah, sure.
So obviously when you had your table of countries and you ranked them all by number of home deliveries, the percentage, Poland was the bottom one. I think
Yes.
Czech Republic was just above it, from memory.
Correct, yeah.
And Czech was, give or take, 30%. And Poland was Poland was about 80% home delivery. Out of home.
Out of home, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I wanted to pause there. Guys, any questions from the audience? I've checked the app. There's none come in. Everything that Daniel shared with you so far, it all makes sense. It kind of follows. I don't know whether you're going to go over this again, but one thing that struck me was the Vinted example. There you've got a business that kind of almost repurposed itself from being a marketplace to being an incredible logistics solution, right? Yeah. What are there lessons that retailers can learn with how Vinted embraced this opportunity? And what are they? And if you're covering it later on, just tell me I'm covering it later on.
Yeah, no, I'll answer. So, and I think a lot of this is my views, right? So I'll answer my views. I'll let Vitautas and the team at Vinted perhaps at another opportunity to kind of give their views. So Vinted several years ago understood who their addressable market is, who are their target customers. They're young, digital, environmentally conscious shoppers, and they looked into the markets where they wanted to launch, and it started in France, right? And they saw, well, what is our offering? What is the most sustainable? What can the current carriers offer us? And I think the reason that all of this has snowballed and become so successful, or at least even started, was because they saw a gap in the offer. They didn't see enough that is going to encourage them to want to just work with a carrier. And so they then started investing into their own infrastructure, and all of this has then snowballed, and they had a vision, they had a strategy, and they stuck to it. And so we now see that Vinted, they have now, I think it's in the region of 5,000 parcel machines. They have in France, They have even more PUDOs, so shop-in shops. I'm not even sure. There's lots of different terms: shop-in shops, parcel shops, package shops, in France alone. And they're now in the process of replicating this in Portugal, in Spain, in Italy, the Netherlands, and Belgium. And so they've started one place. They've cracked the market. They have a critical density, which is facilitating this C2C product exchanges.
Is it a closed network, C2C, or
Yes.
do they open it up? So it's a closed C2C network, and it's because obviously setting up a C2C locker network is very capital intense, right? So you need quite deep pockets to do that.
Yeah, sure.
That's kind of beyond most retailers to even think about going that strategy.
And absolutely, from my perspective, there's a lot of people, they talk about, we're at a limit. There's lockers everywhere, and I completely disagree.
Yeah.
That said, is there room for every retailer to have 5,000 lockers in every country?
Yeah.
Absolutely not. So I think we're still in early stages. There's still a lot of space. There's still a lot of missing infrastructure. But I think the future is going to have to be much more consolidation of that infrastructure.
One of the earlier presentations from that I did, they talked about, I think it was DPD, they talked about it's now so much easier to install a locker than it used to be. You used to have a power source and drill a hole, burr a trench, all that stuff. Now you've got solar panels, you've got batteries that last 5 years, so now it's so much easier and therefore so much quicker to deploy a network. Is that fair to say, or?
It is. It is. There is. So this is one of the areas, and I didn't talk about this, and I probably should have done. So we talk about what could the carriers be doing. We talk about what could the retailers be doing, and I probably should have started talking a little bit about what could the regulators be doing.
Right.
If I look at Germany, and I'm sure if I've got any German people in the audience, it is a nightmare. The amount of red tape and hoops that you need to jump through as an organization to try and to be able to get locations and get the required approvals to be able to have things like lockers installed is incredible. And once you've got it cracked, for example, in one Bundesland, in one county, one part of Germany, you've got to start all over again because they have different rules and regulations in the next Bundesland. So you can't even crack Germany kind of once. You have to crack Germany as a whole. And they have all sorts of different regulations. If you're in residential areas, you want to install lockers in a residential area, you have regulations associated to noise. And it's not just the noise of the actual locker and the doors closing. It's the noise that the locker produces. So if you're on your way home from the pub at 1 o'clock in the morning with your mates and you remember, I had a parcel, I want to go and pick that up from the locker, are you going to be there talking at 1 o'clock in the morning? Right. Are you going to be shouting at each other? Right. And that's not allowed to exceed 40 decibels. So there's a lot of building regulations, local council regulations, residential area regulations, which so the technology, yes, is improving. The regulators could also help make things a lot. So
this is what you talked about, the stakeholder mapping. You've got regulators, local authorities, you've got carriers, you've got the retailers, you've got the shopper and the role they've got to play in all this. So it's clearly a kind of a multi-stakeholder engagement thing has got to continue to improve, right? Sure. Sorry, I interrupted you. I didn't want to get in the middle of your flow, but...
It's all right. That's all right. It's your fault if it goes wrong from now on. We were saying that, if we, as a whole, it feels like we have a lot of out-of-home points. In total, though, across that many people, we don't have a very, what I would consider to be enough density. And so there is still a lot of room for infrastructure, whether it's lockers or whether it's PUDO points. And Poland would be, for me, an example where you can say, look, there is room to grow. In every single other country in Europe, Poland has probably one of the highest densities. Maybe Estonia, I think, is probably on a par in terms of density, but in terms of numbers, Poland is leading the way. And this is also something that could be leading, it's a chicken and egg situation. You have, do you need to have the infrastructure first to be able to then encourage people that it's a good idea, consumers and customers, it's a good idea to use?
Catch-22.
It's a bit of a catch-22, but now they have this critical, what do you consider to be critical density in Poland, and you saw the figures at the start of the presentation. You have a very high preference.
Is that 7 minutes? Is that a 7-minute drive or a walk? In the Polish stat there, 90% of Poland's urban population are less than 7 minutes.
Walk.
Wow.
And so if we extrapolate, I suppose, that out, so that kind of density or that critical density per population of out-of-home points that you really need, and in fact this is based on lockers.
Wow.
What we have mapped out, and this is something that we did ourselves, a very basic calculation, that there is a significant amount of infrastructure missing for out-of-home to start really being able to play a much more significant role when we take the parcel volumes as a whole. Right now we're talking 5%, 10% of volumes, and moving forwards we really need those volumes to get up on the out-of-home to alleviate the pressures that we explored earlier on last mile two-door delivery.
I guess here, and it's probably going to come up in your presentation anyway, but I guess it's also about individual locker utilization and the average time a parcel stays in a locker and replenishment, so two refills a day, so all of that could come into play that might reduce the overall footprint. But I guess it's what you were saying before, it's this catch-22 with a network that substantial. It then becomes part of the way people behave and live, and then suddenly it becomes a new norm. I mean, whether an out-of-home network is successful, I mean, we could probably spend a few hours talking about the variables associated to it. Everybody has a role to play, whether it's the retailers, whether it's the carriers, whether it's the communes, the local countries. But you're absolutely right. So if I was putting my retailer glasses on, why should I really care about out of home? I'd only really care that I'm selling more things and that people are getting them eventually, and they're getting them in the means and the way that they like. So I think one thing that probably resonates, or at least I hope resonates with retailers, is cost. Moving forwards, we explored before, the cost of delivery is only going to increase. That means the cost for delivering your parcels, if we rely 100% on home delivery, is also going to increase. And lockers, out of home capability is going to at least enable you to maintain last mile costs, or perhaps even decrease your costs per parcel moving forwards. We're increasing the access to parcels, and as we explored in the previous slide as well, there is a significant potential for growth. Two-door delivery, it feels very much as though we don't really have an awful lot of potential for growth. We're missing people that are going to be able to do those rounds. And we have a lot of missing infrastructure on the out-of-home. So we see the volumes increasing. We need a network to increase, and that network is out-of-home. As I suppose a summary, I had 3 points here. I suppose it could have been a lot more points, but 3 is a nice number. I think as an industry in general, we could and we should be pushing carriers to grow their out-of-home networks. They are investing money right now. And I think they're doing this because they see the challenges, they see the needs, they see the trends. And I think the retailers should also be pushing their carriers and expecting from their carriers that they are doing this. So confirming their investments into these networks are the right thing to do, and that they should continue doing them. If you have bricks and mortar stores, I would love to start seeing more of this media mark type thing that we saw earlier. You should be parcel shops. You should have lockers in your stores, outside of your stores. It helps you boost footfall, but it also is helping this general ecosystem grow. And I'd love to start seeing more out of home promoted or even incentivized from within the checkout. It's interesting. The banks 40 years ago, when they installed ATMs, cash machines, they put them outside of the branches in the walls, the hole in the wall, right? The reason they did that is because they didn't want queues of people inside the branches, yeah? Then they realised nobody was coming inside the branch to cross-sell services. So they then moved the ATMs from outside to inside. Right? Okay. And that's a little bit like what you're saying here with your second point. If you put lockers inside of stores, and I've seen supermarkets in the UK, you've got an Amazon locker, you've got an agnostic locker, like InPost, for example. And it's obviously, it's always positioned at the furthest point. So you've got to walk through the store. So you do your shop and then you pick up your parcel from the locker and you go home, which of course is a very green way of doing it, because you're not going there with the single purpose of collecting a parcel. You're coincidentally doing it in the most sustainable way.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a double-edged sword. I'd love to see that, because seeing that is better than nothing. Obviously, if you're installing lockers within a store, you are then reducing your access to the lockers quite considerably, because you're relying on the shop opening times, or you're reducing the availability of that locker to shop opening times.
Good point.
So it's double-edged. I'd love to see that. It's better than nothing, but yeah.
Okay, that's a good point. Is that you?
That's me.
Jesus. He looks better in the flesh, doesn't he?
I'm not very photogenic, all right?
No, you actually look better in the flesh. Right. On that light-hearted note, after I put my foot right in it, has anybody got a question for the very youthful-looking Daniel?
It was a tough day that day when I had that photo.
Yes, we've got a question. Awesome. I get to shut the cube. That's amazing. Thank you so much for this. Right. Get ready. You ready? I nearly fell off stage there. I forgot there's a big hole here.
That was light in the boot.
Right. Your question. Say who you are, where you're from, and then deliver your question.
Hi, I'm Christopher. I'm from Nashville in the United States.
Welcome.
And my question is, so with deliveries to lockers, there's kind of two kind of thought processes on it. Is, there's they select the locker locations during checkout, or they redirect to them while in transit. During checkout comes with it a lot of different tech integration. So where do you see the industry kind of leaning towards in the future? Do you anticipate it leaning more towards, the full integration during the checkout, or because of the, overhead, do you see it leaning more towards the in-transit redirection?
I would love to see it fully integrated. From my perspective, it needs to be that when you're buying something, you need to be able to know, I want to send it straight to my locker. I think we're already seeing some of this already. US, by the way, this is quite interesting for you, because lockers, I think, are almost non-existent in the US. So we're seeing here, this is really in this space in Europe. There's a hell of a lot of movement. We know all the stuff that's been talked about recently with Royal Mail investment into out of home, InPost investment into the UK for growth. We're seeing it pretty much across all countries in Europe. America right now, you're a bit silent.
It's interesting. Can I ask you a question? Obviously, the last time I went to the States a few years ago, 2 years ago maybe, I did see a lot of FedEx, and FedEx in particular, almost parcel drop-off points, right? So they've got them, if you're sending a parcel, and they're in sort of business parks and, next to a hotel where you can drive up and put your parcels in there or your mail in there, and then they collect it like on a milk round kind of thing. So you do it when sending, but it's not in terms of receiving deliveries. You haven't got there yet, or?
There are some limited, there are lockers for picking packages up, and then there's also a lot of out of store solutions. It's just not nearly as prevalent as in the EU.
And what's your thinking on that? Do you think that's going to change, like we've seen the data here for Europe and Asia in particular?
I think in more urban areas, that's where we'll see it having that kind of concentration. But the US is still very rural, so then it's not the perfect solution for everywhere, but in certain areas, I think. Okay. That's where we're seeing it coming up a lot.
Cool. Thanks for the question. Any other questions from the audience? Yeah, there's one at the front. Would you want to do the honours and pass the ball?
Hi, I'm Peter from Logistics Business. So with respect to our friend from the US, I think a 7-minute walk is a bit of a push for the average US citizen. So I just wondered what the environmental impact of that would be. Whether, for example, you have one one delivery vehicle making 100 drops to a single locker point, and then 100 vehicles travelling a few miles each to collect those. Whether that sort of negates any sort of environmental benefit of lockers.
It's a problem, right? Writing more sustainable delivery option on this type of solution is kind of not really the right thing to do, because it is if you're going to walk. Mm-hmm. But it was also discussed earlier by GeoPost. As soon as somebody gets in their car, so of course for the carrier it's great, 50 parcels in one go, fantastic. I drive once, get rid of 50 parcels instead of 50 different addresses. But as soon as your customers are then getting in their own car to drive specifically to go and pick up that parcel, so it's not as part of a journey they were going to do anyway, then this whole sustainability question is just completely lost.
It's a really interesting point. That there was a presentation yesterday from Carissimo, the French post office, the parcel division, and they'd done loads of research, and they concluded that approximately, this is in France, 50% of parcel shop or locker collections were done as a one-off, going there for the purpose and coming back. The rest, so another 50%, were en route to do something else, or they were passing and so on. So that's France. It was a pretty sizable sample. I think about 7,000 respondents. Of course, that it's about education. It's about people understanding that to be really smart, try and choose a locker on a day where you're going to the school run, you pick it up, or you're coming back from work, you pick it up, and so on. And
it is a density. So I work in the locker space, and I don't use lockers. I said this in a few presentations, and it's sort of luckily there's nobody else from my company here, but I don't use the lockers in my town because they're the other side of the town. So I don't want to drive. I would have to drive, and so for me it is the last option. So density from my perspective is key. If I had one within 2 or 3 minutes walking distance from my home, fantastic. I would definitely use it.
Good question, thank you for that. There's a question just behind you, you have to throw so far. And then Paul, you've got one, yeah? Okay. Yes, sir.
Hi, Miragal, last mile experts. Coincidentally, I'm the author of the report which be shown on the presentation. The purpose of reports and purpose of the density, which Daniel has mentioned, is to convince and educate the customers, consumers, to walk. The collection should be on my way.
Okay.
Only then we will get the sustainability results. And talking about the density from the carrier perspective, the usual the driver mixture between the B2C and B2B deliverer can do max 250 deliveries per day. Guess how many can InPost driver do that in a dense area in Poland?
What, by doing locker box replenishment?
Yes. Yeah.
I would say maybe 5 times that number, maybe 1,000.
Up to almost 1,500.
Wow, okay.
This is also the great savings for the CO2 emission, because the density, which Daniel has mentioned, is a key for the success, not only from the consumer perspective, but also from the carrier perspective.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of questions about where the Poland will hit the roof with the density. Right now we have in Poland approximately 55,000 lockers. By the end of this year, we expect 60,000, and it's still growing. Then, in theory, sky is the limit.
Yeah.
Answering your question about Asia.
Yes.
Why the Asia is so low density of locker, or in some countries there is any locker at all? Labor cost. The labor cost comparing to the capex is killing the business.
That's really interesting, because you made that point. That was one of the drivers of it moving in Europe, is the opposite. Labour cost is so high, insurance is high, cost of diesel is high, and so on. So you've got the dynamic that drives locker adoption in Europe does the opposite in Asia. Except maybe for countries like Singapore, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, but for example, the biggest worldwide network, Hivebox in China, with 500,000 of lockers, the delivery to the locker costs the driver 10 cents. And he will never get this revenue when he will be doing this, a couple of times, because he needs to pay by himself.
Okay.
But for example, countries like Malaysia or Taiwan, sorry, not Taiwan, Vietnam,
Yeah.
there is almost no infrastructure at all because the labor cost is so low.
Okay. Thank you for that question. Say hello to Marek for me.
Of course.
Right, Paul, need him there?
Good catch.
That was a good catch, wasn't it? I didn't know I could do that. Good afternoon, everybody. Paul Needham from CP Research. Daniel, thank you. Interesting. Sorry, I had to miss about half of your presentation. Picking up on the regulators, coming back to that. Interesting, because not many people... When we talk about lockers, out of home and all the rest of it, obviously there's a lot of discussion about the benefits, the positive side of it, and I think that a lot of that's quite clear. But on the negative side of it, or the barriers, the obstacles, there are various things out there. And people often talk about the lack of space and urban costs, and you talked about that as well. Picking up on the regulators, do you think regulators have got out of home and lockers in particular on their radar screen? And I'm thinking postal regulators in particular, who are in charge of having an overview of the USO, Universal Postal Service, in European countries. In Germany, for example, out-of-home delivery points are now included into the USO definition as a retail point. But I don't know if that's the same in other countries or not. So the question, Daniel, I suppose, is what would be the role, what would be a positive role for regulators to be playing in the overall out-of-home development?
So I think,
what can they do?
Yeah, I think this is interesting. I think there is a lot. You have all the national postal operators who are governed by the USO, which is not always helpful. Certainly, if you're trying to be a for-profit organisation and do good things, and then you kind of got this ball and chain around your ankle trying to stop you from doing good things. In Germany, I know that they have the USO. They changed that they can have an automated branch count as a branch. They have to have a post office in every town and village that has 2,000 inhabitants. So a lot of these places don't have any places that they can even have a post office, and so instead now they have a locker with all of the services that are counted under the USO incorporated within it. So that was a significant win, certainly for DHL, Deutsche Post in Germany. I know in Belgium, if there's any Belgians in the audience, please keep me honest, but there was a recent change to regulation which mandated an out-of-home option to be offered to every consumer when they are making purchases. And so these are the types of things that I see moving forwards that more countries, more regulators should be doing. So mandating inclusion of certain types of delivery to out-of-home, and reducing the red tape associated to actually installing these types of solutions.
Yeah. Okay. And I think on the point that was made by the gentleman from Last Mile Experts, if we can prove that having locker density drives down CO2 because of changing behaviour and people walk to get parcels, then I think that has to be a big argument for the regulators and local authorities to lower the barriers to entry. Yeah, has to be. Right, we've got time for one last final question. Was there a gentleman at the back? Yeah, Paul, if you can just chuck it behind you.
Just chuck it. Go on. Over your head.
Ready? No, I want to do this.
That was perfect, Paul.
Philip from Dragonfly Shipping from Canada. Quick question. You've put a lot of emphasis on retailer and carrier building network. In Canada, a bit like in the US, I mean, it's right now we're a bit in silent mode and we're waiting to see what's going to happen. And what we're seeing actually is company building, I mean, not manufacturer, but company working with manufacturer and creating carrier agnostic network.
Yeah.
Do you think these guys have a role to play in creating density in Europe, in North America in general?
So carrier agnostic networks.
Exactly.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're also seeing a rise of that in Europe as well, right? So we have organizations, my Flexbox, for example, Deinfach, we have a few organizations in Europe that are growing. And I think their challenges that they have is they don't have any traffic. They are reliant on coming up with having those relationships then with the carriers to take some of that traffic. And it's very difficult to have the necessary capital to be funded well enough, especially in a country of the scale of Canada, to be able to create a network as a private company operating an agnostic network. And I think, by the way, the challenges that you might have in Canada is I believe Canada Post isn't doing very well. So probably they're not going to be the ones that are going to be leading
the charge.
These types of investments.
Right, we're going to finish now. Before you go, stay where you are. Daniel, stand there. I want to take a picture of you with your amazing audience just behind you. Right, I want you all to pretend you really enjoyed that and you found Daniel's presentation stimulating and entertaining. All right, so if you can keep that, that's perfect, Paul. More of that. Hands raised up, smile. Fabulous. And one with me in it. You ready? Great. Thank you, Daniel. That was amazing. Thank you, guys.
Thanks very much.
See you next year.